President Trump says he's told American negotiators not to rush into a deal with Iran a day after he said a deal was largely negotiated.
Well, he says it would include reopening the Strait of Hormuz and that Iran must understand it can't develop or procure a nuclear weapon. Tehran, meantime, has stressed that differences still remain between the warring parties. It disputes Mr. Trump's claim that reopening the Strait of Hormuz was in the agreement, saying the waterway must remain under Iranian control.
Iran's Tasnim news agency also accused the U.S. of obstructing parts of a potential deal, including Tehran's demand for the release of frozen funds. It warns negotiations could still collapse. And for more insight on diplomatic efforts to reach a deal, let's speak now with Stephen Zunes, who's professor of politics at the University of San Francisco. Professor, good to see you again. Trump said a deal was on the table, but now telling his team not to rush into signing one. So why is he having apparently some second thoughts?
There has been some pushback from hawks within the administration and among his allies in Congress, and presumably from Israel as well, that he has to take into account. But my sense is that we're actually closer to a deal than we've been before. I mean, I've been quite skeptical of previous claims of an imminent breakthrough and the like, but we may actually be getting close on this one, but of course, close may not be enough. If we could indeed see a resumption of hostilities or any continuation of the current stalemate, but it does appear that both sides, with the support of key Middle Eastern players, appear to be actually moving forward.
Professor, you sound optimistic. It's worth thinking about what kind of a deal this is. What would you be watching for to tell whether this is real momentum rather than a tactical pause?
Well, if the reports are coming out are true, it will mean that Iran will have some degree of control, along with Oman, the Arab Sultanate that shares the Strait of Hormuz, that there will be some lifting of some of the sanctions, particularly some of the frozen assets, and the U.S. will lift its blockade of the blockade. But the big sticking point, of course, is the nuclear side, which they say they'll be working towards within 30 days. And but there does seem to actually be some movement in that direction as well. So maybe calling me optimistic is a little too strong, but let's just say I'm less pessimistic than I have in the past several weeks.
Understood. Professor Zunes, I want to press you a little bit about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran now realizes that it can both weaponize as well as monetize, this waterway. So I'm wondering whether or not whatever it's agreed to in this present deal is more temporary and tactical with, I guess, other longer-term control intentions on Tehran's mind?
Unfortunately, I think the Iranians have recognized they do have the power to enforce some degree of control over what should be an international waterway. But unfortunately, thanks to Trump and Netanyahu's war, they recognize they have this power, they have this authority to assert this. And while there are many reasons to object to Iran having this amount of control of this vital maritime choke point, there don't seem to be many good alternatives. I mean, the stalemate obviously cannot stay. I mean, given all the economic damage and the like, but returning to war would just make things worse. So it appears that the United States and its Arab allies are just trying to make the best of a bad situation that does ultimately put Iran in a stronger position overall than it was when the hostilities commenced back in late February.
And if the Hormuz choke point does indeed reopen, Iran wants to have conditions attached. It seems to want that at least. It's not simply a return to the old status quo. So who decides that the choke point's truly open? Is it the U.S. Navy? Is it the Gulf states, the insurers, or even the shipping market greatly impacted by the current situation?
It depends on what the agreement says. And I do believe that unlike some of the issues that are being discussed where there is some latitude for interpretation, that we will see greater freedom of movement. Maybe not 100% as it was prior, but certainly enough to try to ease the pain that this has caused to the Arab Gulf states themselves, and of course much of the international community, especially those of you in Asia. But to what extent this will who will determine what comes through and what doesn't? I mean, there are certainly some sticking points to be concerned about, but again, I think all sides agree that the status quo is untenable, and any improvement will be welcome.
Professor Zunes, I've come across reports that say this particular deal includes a commitment by Iran not to pursue nuclear weapons. We also know Trump says the deal will be different from the one made by Barack Obama. We know the parameters of that particular deal. So what clues is he offering in terms of the scope and duration of this supposed nuclear deal?
Well, Iran has long said they do not plan on building a nuclear weapon. Well, whether one can agree with, think that's being honest or not, obviously is debatable. So such a declaration would not be anything new. In terms of returning to the Iran nuclear deal, I mean, that has seemed to be the logical position from the get-go, but given that Trump has rejected it, and actually the hardliners were strengthened by the fact that the United States broke it off, it would be difficult to return to the status quo ante. My guess is that whatever nuclear agreement will actually not be that much different, and if anything, it would be somewhat more in Iran's favor. But however it's done, I'm sure Trump will try to claim that it is some kind of great victory on his part, even if it ends up being not as thorough or as the original signed in 2015.
And if this deal, Professor, leaves the fate of Iran's enriched uranium to later talks, does that lower then the risk of renewed strikes, or simply set up the next deadline for escalation?
Well, certainly there is the risk of having some kind of stalemate, but there are reports that there has been progress in these areas. So it's not like they'll be starting from scratch with a 30-day countdown. Now, Iran had already given up all of its reprocessed uranium and had a 3.67% limit on the enrichment in the original nuclear deal. I think it is quite possible to do that again. I mean, the international community was able to oversee the destruction of certain nuclear facilities and the removal of what they had already. So it certainly can be done again. But given that both Washington and Tehran is currently led by people who are actually more hardline than the original negotiators were back in 2015, I can only imagine that there will be bumps in the road.
Stephen Zunes, thank you so much, Professor of Politics at the University of San Francisco. Appreciate you joining us.